Morning, everyone. Happy Mondays and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I am joined by the Mirror's Deputy Online Political Editor, Lizzy Buchan, who also has one of the fabulous News Agenda mugs, which you too can win if you have some of the best comments this year. We're going to hand them out to our viewers, perhaps the best ones by the end of the year. Lizzy, can you hear us? I think we've got some technical issues. She's going to quit and come back. So hopefully she'll be able to wave her mug when she does. Now, this is the People's Paper Review. So get into the comments. Ask us your questions. We can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on an investigation. It's by the Sunday Times, actually, but let's not go too much depth about that. They splashed an investigation about how 8 of the last 9 Tory treasurers have been rewarded with peerages and a seat in the House of Lords. Now, the job of treasurer, if you're running a local cricket club, is just to run the accounts, right? But in the Conservative Party, there seems to be 2 aspects to it. The first is that they always seem to give a donation to the Conservatives themselves. That's one. The second is that they're supposed to solicit cash from their contacts to bring in big bucks for the party in order to spend at election time. So if you're a millionaire who's friends with lots of other millionaires, you're given a job in order to get all the millionaires in a circle and giving cash to the Tories. Now, a realist may well think that getting a peerage in that situation perhaps hangs on raising a certain amount or hitting a fundraising target, let's say £10 million or something like that. And these guys also seem to have donated some of their own millions to the Tories, which obviously would move them closer to any potential figure if there is one. And therefore would mean that they are effectively buying themselves a seat in the House of Lords. Now, Lizzy, are you back? Can you hear us?
I am back. I can hear you loud and clear.
Show the viewer your mug, because we've all got these mugs and they're fabulous and the whole world will want one of these. They are collector's items.
Very stylish.
They're very stylish. And you definitely don't want to break them on the floor. Now, so take us through it. Now, it seems, Lizzy, that today that the SNP have actually called the police in now over this Tory treasurer thing. But peerages have always been for sale, haven't they? I mean, although they shouldn't be. What's new? Why is this a big scandal now?
Well, I think you've got to look at it in the context of, the SNP are long-standing critics of the House of Lords in general. They want it to be abolished. They are very vocal about how they think it's a bad system. So when the story, I think when the news kind of came out yesterday about the sheer number of Conservative party treasurers who had ended up in the Lords, the SNP were obviously very quick to jump into that and say that, you know, that this is an unacceptable situation, and to ask the police whether they'll investigate it because of, you know, potential corruption. Obviously, it's a complicated picture because the government's argument is that these people are philanthropists. They're, you know, business people who are very wealthy, that they are giving money to the Conservative Party as a kind of philanthropic gesture because they want to support it.
If you're a Tory Prime Minister, or anyone in the Conservative Party, or any party for that matter, you probably do think that your party is a public service. It's just the rest of the general public that don't think it's necessarily a public service to be funding it.
No, exactly. And we're kind of, the situation we've got is that there's just a very murky, there's a very murky situation about how this works, because prime ministers can nominate people to join the House of Lords, and it's a kind of blurry line between what's effectively rewarding people who have useful experience in public life and have learn a lot in business, in whatever their field is, and basically cash for access. And it seems, you know, looking at this, it doesn't look great. The fact that all of these Conservative treasurers have been given huge sums of money to the party and then have ended up in the Lords, and also lots of them aren't really contributing very much, because it's one thing to be in the House of Lords and to be doing lots of work and campaigning around various issues and scrutinising legislation, but lots of people, it seems, are sort of taking the allowance that you get to speak in the to turn up to the House of Lords and not really speaking. And so what's the point from a taxpayer and a sort of citizen's perspective of having people with this position if they're not actually contributing to public life?
Yeah, and the point of it, I suppose, if you are one of those people, is that you get to call yourself Lord or Lady something or other, and you get lots more non-executive directorships that pay slightly better as a result, perhaps. Now, Maggie says there may be previous leaders of industry, etc., but I understand some of them have never made a comment in the House of Lords. So what are they there for other than the title and £300 a day? Exactly what you were just saying, Lizzy. And they're probably not there for the £300 a day. If they're not going in, they can't claim the allowance, Maggie. But what they can be doing is using that title to enrich themselves outside Parliament, because having Lord such and such on the board of your company gives you a cachet and an ability to do other things. And that's Peter Cruddis. And he was given a peerage, despite the fact the Peerage Appointments Committee said that he shouldn't because it was all looking a bit dodgy. Larry there is saying, is it time to abolish the House of Lords? It doesn't help, does it? I mean, I'm in favour of there being a second chamber, like you say, to have the expertise and everything. But when you've got people like this who are getting appointed over the heads of the standards checks, what's the point of having the standards checks, Lizzy?
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation, because every government, every opposition party sort of says, oh, we need to reform the House of Lords. They've been saying that for years, but actually nothing really ever seems to get done. And the attempts by Labour to slim down the size of the House of Lords seem to have totally failed. It's now as bigger than ever, because they keep sending more people there, and you've got these kind of standards checks that are supposed to prevent people from just turning up and not contributing, but turning up for 5 minutes so that they can claim the 300 quid and then leave, or using their position as a way to lobby ministers in an inappropriate way. And it doesn't seem like the system's working at all.
No.
We can have all sorts of conversations about whether the House of Lords should exist or not, but the government seems to want to keep it, but ultimately it doesn't seem like the system's really working.
Exactly. And unless you want to take it on and change it really drastically, then, as Labour found when they were in power for a long time, the only way to get around it is to appoint more of your own peers to try and get legislation through, which then means the whole thing becomes very unwieldy. So keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the House of Lords? What do you think about the SNP and the call on the police to investigate how these Tory treasurers are getting their peerages? Now, John says, I voted Conservative all my life, but the showering government now should go. I hate to say it, but it's true. they're not really doing the Conservative Party any favours, John. You're quite right. They're not painting them in the best of lights. And Mike says, morning, Mike. Well, at least Zach Goldsmith's contribution to the country is in no doubt. He got Johnson out of the country for a week, and that was worth the peerage alone. We've also got this issue here with the free holiday that he had in Zach Goldsmith's house, having ennobled him already, of course, that he won't say how much he benefited from in that. Hasn't put a figure on it. And Jason says, I don't like corruption, but I disagree with getting rid of the House of Lords. We do need a House of Lords. Jason, I agree with you, but I don't know that these are the Lords we need in it necessarily. Now, Boris, if I was offered a peerage, would I accept it? My mother would say yes. I would say no on the basis of I've railed against it too often. I'd be a raging hypocrite. And also on the basis that you can't be a journalist I don't think you should be a journalist if you're in the House of Lords. Some people are, and I don't approve of that at all. I think once you take a peerage, that's your job. You should be a working peer. But then I would also have some quandaries, because if I was in the House of Lords, which let's face it's never going to happen, but if I was, I could use that position to help the nuclear test veterans that I campaigned for and have campaigned for 20 years, can maybe help them get something through at last, some form of recognition. And if you're going to do it for someone else, then perhaps it's worth it. But I'll tell you what, Better for Britain, if I ever actually get asked to go to the House of Lords, if I ever get ennobled, we'll discuss it here on the news agenda. Until then, I think it's really pie in the sky to talk about.
We'll have Susie in her ermine robe.
No, I think I'll just have a fox pelt all the way around. They're pretty quite like that in the House of Lords. Now, Boris Johnson is being called to the Commons at 3:30 this afternoon to answer an urgent question about the Owen Paterson sleaze scandal, which covered him in audio last week. Did you get that? One of the things Labour's going to go hard on is the fact that the Department of Health will not release minutes of a phone call Owen Paterson had with one of its ministers just after one of the companies he was lobbying for unethically received a multi-million-pound COVID contract. They won't actually tell us what was discussed in that phone call. It's one of the things they're going to get asked about today. Now, Lizzie, this is all really sticky stuff for the Prime Minister, but he won't want to go to the Commons just to be put on trial by Keir Starmer, because he's going to get absolutely roasted if he does. So what are the chances he's going to be urgently hiding in a fridge this afternoon?
I think pretty high. It seems quite unlikely that he'll turn up. He's not technically required to. It's an emergency debate secured by the Liberal Democrats, so that doesn't. The PM's not necessarily the person that would be summoned to answer it. It might be Commons leader Jacob Rees-Mogg, it might be some other senior cabinet minister who will answer for it, but I think it's very unlikely that the Prime Minister will go. He has conveniently been sent off on a visit to Northumberland this morning. We don't have any details.
That's a long way away from Westminster. It's not
sure is. And we don't know I have not had the details yet of what he's doing. They don't always give us a lot of detail in advance for security reasons, but we do know he's up in the northeast. So that's a conveniently long way away and might make it difficult for him to get back to the Commons.
There might be a delayed train or something like that. Yeah. Who knows? Now, Susan, who's a friend of mine, very kindly said I could reform the House of Lords. I would give it a good try, Susan. But like I say, I don't think I'm going to get the chance, because they wouldn't let me in there with a hammer. Now, Mike says, I believe Johnson's washing his hair this afternoon. He'll no doubt send in a junior. That's what I'm going to be looking for, Lizzie, is who he hates enough to send them up to get this. My money's on Dominic Raab.
I think it could be somebody more junior than that. I mean, it's a tricky one, but you've got to feel slightly sorry for some of these ministers and MPs who got sent out to defend the really chaotic and misguided decision to try and block Tory MP Owen Paterson's suspension from the Commons. And you've seen, we've talked in the past before about how Boris Johnson has done so many U-turns since he's been Prime Minister. I think one of my colleagues totted it up on Friday, and it was like 39 U-turns since 2019. And people keep getting sent out to defend these decisions, and then the PM changes his mind. So you wouldn't want to be the person sent to defend the government today, because who knows where the government could end up with this stuff in a day or two, and you've used your credibility to say, oh, it's totally fine to block this suspension and everyone thinks it's brilliant, and then the government changes its mind, you look like an idiot. So there's a lot of anger from Conservative MPs about being forced by the government to vote for these proposals to overhaul the sleaze rules, and to look bad, to make their constituents angry, and then to a day later be told that actually that's not what's happening anymore. So yeah, there's a lot of anger, and I think it'll be quite interesting to see who from the Tory benches is standing up to talk about this, and whether there's any criticism against the government for it. But it sounds like the Prime Minister won't be there. International Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan was on the radio just now, and she was suggesting that he might have it on in the background in his office.
Oh, that's jolly kind of him. Thanks for paying attention, Boris. And keep asking us your questions. What do you think? Should Boris Johnson go to the Commons? Should he get absolutely beasted by Keir Starmer? Is that part of his job, or is he just quite wise to give it a wide berth? It's just playing politics. And Jason says, Lords and MPs should all be banned from business and making money from it while they're Lords or MPs. There is a good argument for that, Lizzy, which is they get paid plenty as far as the rest of us are concerned. But you also have some people whose second jobs is a real benefit to where they are. There's Dr. Rosina Ali Khan on the Labour front benches, who's a casualty doctor. There are GPs, I think, there was on the Tory benches as well. The fact that people are still doing a job of some sort, even if it is only here and there on a shift now and again, is surely beneficial to the overall thing. My rule of thumb would be you can do any second job you like, so long as you only get one second job. You don't get a third and a fourth and a fifth, but you only get a second job, and it's got to earn less and take less time than being an MP. If it earns more, no.
Well, it's a difficult one, because if you were a GP, you might earn more than being...
you can do, but obviously you wouldn't be there.
You wouldn't be
5
working
days a
enough.
week, so you wouldn't be, you'd be pro rata. You'd be earning less than an MP if you're doing 1 day a week, say, which I would be fine with. And I'm also fine with appointing to millionaires to the House of Lords, so long as for every millionaire you get someone on the minimum wage, and they both go up together. That seems to be reasonable.
Yeah, because it is difficult with the second jobs rule. It is difficult when, particularly if you've got MPs who've got medical backgrounds, if they don't do enough shifts per month, I believe they can lose their registration. So if you're Rosina Ali Khan or any of the Tory MPs who are nurses and things like that, that if they have to do a certain number of shifts, otherwise I think they no longer they have to then re-qualify or something like that, because they have to be kind of making sure that they're keeping their practice up all the time. So obviously that is quite important, and has been really useful during the pandemic, that lots of MPs on all sides of the House actually went back to the front line for periods of time to try and help with the effort against coronavirus. And also there have been arguments made in the past that making sure that MPs are working in other jobs kind of means that you can have a broader expertise. You can have people who are in tune with business, with various other elements outside of the Commons, kind of keeping MPs accountable to some of that stuff, that they're not just in their ivory tower. But the problem is basically the rules are supposed to be that MPs are not supposed to enrich themselves by using their position as parliamentarians. That is what the rules are supposed to be. And that would be fine. I think that would work if these rules were being enforced, which they clearly aren't, because Owen Paterson was not allowed to lobby on behalf of these companies. He was breaking the rules. And so if the system was being enforced properly, this would never have happened. But obviously it isn't. And then the government has tried to kind of, but the Standards Committee was very firm. They said he'd broken the rules 14 times, and it was one of the most egregious breaches they'd ever seen. So it's become it's a bit of a mess, the debate, because we're looking at all sorts of elements of sleaze, and it's not that some of these rules don't exist, it's just they're not being listened to.
Yeah, exactly. And you've got things like the committee, COBRA it's called, I don't know what it stands for, I can't remember, that looks after sort of the post-political kind of appointments of some of the ex-politicians, and whether they constitute a conflict of interest with what their job they used to do. And elsewhere it's reported this morning that Owen Paterson, despite having resigned, is still going to have a parliamentary pass, which means he can still go into the corridors of power. And in fact, there's 283 other people who we have booted out of the House of Commons somehow or another, who've been forced to leave, who are able to still go in. So very quickly, before we go on to the next story, Lizzy, I mean, what are the odds that, you know, Patterson and his ilk, they're obviously, he's going to be trying to enrich him. He's stood down from these two businesses he's been involved with for now, but in some point in the future, he's obviously going to go back into business. He's obviously going to be a consultant. He's obviously going to be lobbying his mates again, as are these other 283 probably in some way or another. Why do we let people we've evicted go back into our palace? And what are the chances that the review of all this stuff is going to start ending this sort of post-politics scummery as well?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because the system is that if you're a former MP, you are allowed to have a pass for forever, basically, that you're allowed that access because of the fact that you've been an MP, no matter how long it was for. So that is something that kind of has existed for a long time, but it becomes much more complicated when you've got people who've actually been sort of basically forced out of the Commons because of bad conduct. So there was a case, I think there have been several cases recently where the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards has said this person should not be allowed a parliamentary pass if they apply for one once having left politics. But most of the time that it's an automatic entitlement. So yeah, it is something that perhaps needs to be looked at because people
I can't see the point of it. What is the benefit to us?
Well, you're only there. Those people are only there to lobby ministers, and so you know, lobbying can also be fighting for, lobbying for better money for dementia research or whatever. There are lots of more like lobbying that some people would consider to be not about enriching the MP themselves. It's about fighting for a cause or whatever.
But of course, if you want to go in legitimately and see a politician, you can, any member of the public, make an appointment, go in through security and go in and see that politician, or stand in the public lobbies and grab them as they come past. Any member of the public can do that. But of course, if you have a parliamentary pass, you don't need to have it written down anywhere when you go in, or who it is that you see necessarily.
And you've got the run of the place. You've got greater freedom to wander around. There are bits of the palace that you can go into that the public can't, that sort of thing. So yeah, it certainly gives you more freedom. And yeah, maybe that is something that they might look at.
Well, that bit stinks, I think. Now we're going to get to some of your questions about the House of Lords and Owen Paterson and Boris Johnson's sleaze at the end when we wrap. Now, but first off, we do have some other questions. In a few days, Sajid Javid's deadline, after which any unvaccinated care staff are going to no longer allowed to work in frontline care jabs, is coming in a few days. Now, it turns out that on page 6 and 7, the Mirror is reporting that 61,000 care staff are going to be affected by this rule. That's about 10% of the total. And it's a massive recruitment drive has been underway by the government to try and get new care staff, but they've managed to find just 3,000. Now, Lizzy, leaving aside the ethics for a moment on the vaccination and setting targets for it, it reports here that care workers mostly earn the minimum wage, they are on dodgy contracts, and they get no sick pay. And unions are saying if you raise the pay and conditions, you'll find it much easier to recruit people to replace these you're losing, and also keep staff you've already got, perhaps even convince them that this terribly paying job is actually worth getting jabbed for. So why won't the government do that? That's what's needed if you want staff in a... They've just been saying you need to raise paying conditions for HGV drivers in order to get HGV drivers. So surely they can see that you need to raise the paying conditions of care staff in order to get more care staff.
Yeah, it's endlessly frustrating. The way that the care sector is treated is baffling to me. That after the pandemic and the way that the care sector has, the things they've had to deal with, the work that they've had to do, the risks that people have put themselves under to try and keep, to care for people. There's been no shift in perspective in government about the way that they should be treated. I mean, it's been a scandal for so long how badly carers are paid and the sort of lack of respect that the care sector is treated with in government. I mean, it's a more complicated picture than the NHS because obviously lots of the care sector involves private providers and things like that. So it's a bit more of a patchwork of things. But ultimately, the government has done this ridiculous thing where they forced through the tax rises and said, you know, we're going to fix social care, we're going to hike national insurance in April so that we can fix this sector. And when you actually looked at the small print, all of the money was for clearing the backlog in the NHS, and there was almost no money for social care at all. And I'm not saying the NHS needs money, of course it does, but the care sector and the NHS are connected. And so if the care sector isn't working and there aren't enough staff and there's queues and backlogs and stuff, that has a knock-on impact on the health service. You've got to fix it, and no money seems to have been found to give more money to care workers. And therefore, you're right, like why would people necessarily want to do the job if they're being the pay's so poor, and you know, all of this stuff that if they're not going to be, it's not going to be made more attractive to them, because it's really tough. And the government is trying to get everybody in, but they found money down the back of the sofa for pay rises for other, you know, areas with labour shortages, like you said, HGVs, but they don't seem to be finding cash for the care sector.
No, well, that would mean the government actually taking more responsibility for the social care sector. And like you say, it's been private mostly for so long that if they were to start actually, and I think this is partly why you probably had the lots of deaths in care homes to start with, and such a lack of PPE and so on, other things. If the government were to start taking responsibility for this and start issuing instructions to the social care service about exactly what it should do and taking more control as opposed to just issuing a few bits of guidance, then that would effectively be a step towards nationalising care. And they don't want to do that because it's just too socialist to have like a second NHS, to have an NHS and an NCS, is something they cannot bear the thought of, even though it's something the public massively support. It can produce great savings and economies of scale because you've got these two systems that are, like you say, working together, and their purchasing power is going to be amazing. And Andy Burnham's been talking about it. Labour's been talking about it for years. Never actually quite done it, of course. But it's what I thought after the pandemic is absolute slam dunk. If you get a national care service, everyone's going to be right behind it. And, you know, you could put your penny on national insurance or that for that, and no one's going to mind. That's absolutely dandy. It would make sense. But they won't do it.
They've slightly tried to pretend that they have done it, in the sense that the Department of Health was rebranded the Department of Health and Social Care. And Matt Hancock, when he was Health Secretary, always made a big point that he was the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and always made this big point about it. But actually, as you say, it's not the same service at all. And so there is support amongst the public for that, for basically kind of treating the care sector and the NHS as similar things, because they are similar things.
Of course they are. Exactly. And Lee says there, you know, that he thinks that as a care worker, and they should definitely get more than the minimum wage, as do the rest of us, Lee, frankly. You're talking to the choir here. And Mike says a national care service would be guaranteed vote winner for Labour. Expensive, but no one would doubt it's necessary. Not actually that expensive, actually, when you dig into it. I think the King's Fund says it can be done for a penny on income tax, which is, I think, actually less than what they've just said that you need to have to out of national insurance. So it can be done, and like you say, it's cheaper all round, and we all want it. But that's why the ministers won't take responsibility for it and actually start legislating about it, because it means they've got to start losing some of the donors who are private healthcare providers, and they have to nationalise something, and it's just too socialist for them. Now, we do have some good news though. So it's not all bad. There's some good stuff coming up, and here it is. That was a segue, wasn't it? Now, amid all the talk of shortages at Christmas, it does seem like the government has finally heard the will of the people and has used space on the newly commuter light railways to lay on more freight trains, which means that despite the HGV driver shortage, truckloads of wine from the continent will still get to supermarket shelves just in time for when we want a nip of something to warm us up. In short, the good news is there's wine. That's it. That's the good news, Lizzy. Is this a sign, though, that is this hope, perhaps, that that the most incompetent and useless government of all time might actually just be able to turn things around, do what we want them to? Is this a sign that they've got it in there somewhere if they look really hard?
I think that's a little optimistic, but it is.
I've had wine. No, I haven't.
But yeah, I was going to say we've been drinking already this morning. But no, it is. I mean, this is good news. Obviously, the challenges that were really kind of dominating the front pages towards the end of October about shortages of HGV drivers, of food, of fuel, all that sort of thing was really alarming and for everybody, and kind of really worrying in the run up to Christmas, especially because Christmas was such a nightmare last year. I think everybody is really up for having a bit more normality this year. And then you kind of see a reduction in coronavirus restrictions, but you can't get any food or whatever. You can't drive anywhere to see anyone. So it's good that this is a step in the right direction. But I think, we probably should brace ourselves for the fact that there are challenges ahead.
Yeah, but there'll be wine to help us get through.
There will be wine.
That's something. Now, PJ says, should MPs' jobs and consultancies be shown on the ballot paper as well as in the register of members' interests? Because people don't go and look at the register, although it's public, Lizzy. The fact that someone's got outside earnings or has an outside job is something you tend to pick up if you pay real attention to the news.
Yeah.
And if you don't pay real attention to the news, then it does tend to pass you by. Now, Brian says, hello, ladies. Morning, Brian. No one ever calls us ladies, thank you. Surely there must be some method of eliminating this disastrous fool in a lawful manner. One only has to take a serious look at the COVID data, which appears to be overlooked by much of the media. Actually, people are being killed without an eyebrow being raised. Have you investigated the position of the clinically vulnerable, for instance? It's a complete fiasco and hardly a word now from anywhere. I think I'm right in saying, Lizzy, that the clinically vulnerable no longer have to self-isolate, but a lot of them are anyway, because COVID, right? And it's still there. And some people are waiting still for boosters. Mine's due in a month. I'm in category 6. Not able to get it for a month. So for the next month, I am slightly worried. My immunity will be waning. And I'm teaching in London with a bunch of students who are splattered with COVID, as far as I can tell, once a week. So, if you can't get your booster, it's going to be a bit tricky. And Jason says, how much money did they waste on that app that was pretty much useless? How much money did they waste on that app?
Oh gosh, I can't even remember. It was quite a lot.
It was part of the 37 billion, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a report. There was a report last week from the National Audit Office. I think it was last week, saying that they spent £37 billion on NHS Test and Trace, which is a third of NHS England's entire budget. And it's just been, it's been a total disaster. I can't recall the sum that they spent on the app, but it was in the millions, definitely. Yes. It was quite a lot of money because they tried to create their own, then had to go back and
that was another U-turn.
Yeah.
This thing, so I tried to do this last week, count up the U-turns. I saw somewhere it was 36, and then I thought, hang on, I can think of at least another 2. Then
we did 39.
At the weekend, one of the papers had 47 or something. I thought, actually, just about every day. Just count up the number of days, and that's the U-turns you've probably had. Lee says you could probably buy a lot of wine with what they spent on the app. Yes, that would have been, actually, if they'd just done that and handed out, a few bottles to everybody, I think we'd all got through the pandemic a bit easier. Who knows? Liz says, this will be our last question. Liz says, how can this programme analyse the government perfectly and the Labour Party can't get this sensible opposition out there? You should be in government. Yes, Liz. Well, unfortunately, no one in their right mind. Yes, you're getting a mug, Liz. Right,
you have a mug.
Get into. We'll speak to you after this, all right? But hang around on the Mirror Facebook page, Liz. And we're going to get your address and we'll send you a mug because that's worth it. That kind of thing gets you a mug. Pay attention, everybody. It would be nice, wouldn't it, if Labour were going to do that and do as we told them to? But journalists in power is generally a bad idea, as I think the one who's currently in Downing Street is proving quite nicely, even though we are much more accurate and better than he is. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking part. Thank you, Lizzy, for joining us. And I can't remember the name of the person who's getting the mug, but keep it hanging around and we'll speak to you after this and we'll get your address. Thank you, everybody. And we'll join you again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. And maybe Boris will actually be out of hiding by then. Bye-bye.